the way addiction hits families, the way addiction can hit a community. When you work with people in addiction over the years, you work in these addiction recovery groups, right? You work in facilities, you go into 12-step, into SMART step programming, and you see how the family, especially if you end up in an Al-Anon meeting or some family therapy group, you get to see how one person's addiction can just shatter an entire family. My guest today, Dr. DiRida, Dr. James DiRida is, we're going to be discussing the impact of addiction on families. He's been doing this work for 25 years, and 35 years he's been in his own recovery. I'm going to let Doctor tell his story. But again, here we are at the CCSAD, the C4 2020 virtual conference, and I get my hands on the experts and get their information into your hands as fast as we can so we can bypass that middle part where we don't know what's going on. So folks, thank you for joining me on another episode of Beyond Risk and Back. I'm your host, Aaron Huey. My guest today is Dr. James DiRida. Doctor, thank you so much for being on the show here. Anything to do with families, anything we do to talk to parents about what their kids are doing, what their older kids might be doing, and how it's really impacted the entire family. So thank you for being with us. I appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, let's go back to the beginning because you got to tell me the story offline, and I had wished I had hit record while you were telling it. But and then I asked if you were from Boston or from New York, and now that I know that you're from Boston, I know the whole New York comment completely insulted you, so I apologize for that. But being from Massachusetts, talk about what you told me about when you were a kid in addiction.
Sure. Well, first of all, the New York comment doesn't insult me. My daughter is at school in New York. I just got back from there the other day.
Phenomenal.
I love New York.
Good.
And I love New England too. So it started for me, you had mentioned me being in recovery 35 years. So obviously it started with my own journey and, learning what I could about how to stay sober and how to put my life back together.
Right.
And along the way, I started to do some volunteer work with people that were struggling with addictions. And that's really where it started. And so for the first 10 years, the focus was on helping people that were in detox or get to detox or get to meetings after detox and things like that. But it was all, sort of client-centered or client-driven. About 25 years ago, I met a guy who did interventions. And what his focus was more on the family and the family system and the impact of addiction than it was on the individual struggling with addiction. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And so I trained with him and got to know him and started to really change my sort of perspective on my focus to really look at what does this sickness we call addiction do to family systems. And I know, and probably most of the audience listening knows, it devastates them. It rips them apart. It did it to my family. It will do it to anyone's family who struggles with this addiction if they don't know what to do. And so for me, that was really the beginning. And I ended up doing a private practice, and I would get numerous calls from mostly mothers crying and pleading,
Sure.
like, I don't know what to do. I'm lost. Can you help me? What should I do? My kid is out of control, and I don't know what to do. And they were very serious. They didn't know what to do. And so I and two colleagues of mine, actually, in recovery and childhood friends, believe it or not, since we were probably 10 or 12, all had survived addiction. Our community got devastated by addiction. There was a small sort of Italian enclave in Central Mass. Addiction blew it apart. We survived, a long story on the short version. We survived and managed to tell. And so we sat down and said, through our experiences, we've learned a little something about addiction and recovery. Maybe we got something that can help these families.
Sure.
And so we sat down and we started to write this book called The East Side of Addiction. The East Side is the neighborhood that we grew up in, the East Side of Worcester. It was an Italian section, predominantly Italian-Irish. And so we took our stories and kind of combined them to tell the larger story that there is hope. People are resilient, even if they have addiction. You can get better if you know what to do and if you have the supports. And that's where most families fell short, is they really didn't know what to do. And so we put this book out. It received wonderful reviews, and we traveled the circuit. You mentioned Al-Anon. In Massachusetts, there's a wonderful group called Learn to Cope. that was set up by a woman named Joanne Peterson, whose son was addicted, and she started this group in her kitchen, and it exploded. And probably 10 years ago, it's learn, the number 2, and then cope. And now it's branched out outside of Massachusetts. But what they do is help families to understand addiction and to learn, what do I do and how do I help? And so my partner and I, one of our co-authors, sad to say, passed away a couple of years ago from some heart complications, but he was 32 years in recovery. We've been in recovery for 30, myself 35, my other partner, Jack, for like 32. And so we started to share and go around and do the circuit and talk to these people, again, that were predominantly mothers, families, that were just lost and desperately looking for some hope, looking for some help, looking for some answers or some understanding, because what they were seeing wasn't what they were used to. They saw their loved one change and become somebody that they didn't know. And so that was really how this all really started.
Let's talk about the stigma and the myth of the "tell me about your mother" aspect of psychology. What is it? First, I guess I want to know, what is it about that question? Let's talk about your mother, that is so prevalent. Why do we do that? And then number 2, why does group work for families work? And I know it's a softball question, yet within the answer, I know that parents, my guests, my listeners, start to realize that this connectivity piece that they're missing because they're isolated, thinking they're the only person goes through it. They really do get reinforced is you need to get your butt to a meeting, not just the addict who's struggling. So again, why? Tell me about your mother. Why is that prevalent in psychology? Because I believe that's created the stigma of mothers actually going to get the help that they need.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is, within that inherently there's this immediate sort of feeling of you're blaming me as the mother. I'm being blamed for how my kid turned out.
Right.
And that's just not the case.
Of course.
I mean, we know, understanding family systems, that, all members of a family impact one another for better or for worse. And, that's just the dynamic. It doesn't mean that one's responsible for somebody becoming addicted.
Right.
However, we know that where you grow up, how you grow up, all those factors play a part in influencing how your life goes. And so the sickness of addiction, it can hit anybody, anywhere, anytime. And it really doesn't make a lot of sense to families who say, well, we don't have that in our family, So when we talk about it's a family illness, there are people that become addicted who have no history of family addiction. There are people that get injured, they get put on pain medication, they become addicted. There are people that try it once, fall in love, they have some sort of chemical sort of makeup that says this is the greatest thing ever, and I'm going to sell my soul for it.
Right.
And so that's the part about addiction, Aaron, is there's so much misunderstanding and so much that people don't know. I mean, we know a lot nowadays. Yeah. When I started 35 years ago, I don't think we quite understood the brain and the brain chemistry and how it plays into addiction as much as we do nowadays. But we still don't have all the answers.
Sure. I
can't tell you who's going to become addicted and who's not. We know the probabilities, and we know, some of the genetic predisposition theory and all of that. But we really just don't know. So we do the best we can to try to help people understand, especially, parents, because they fall into that, I'm responsible, or you're trying to blame me, which is where the mother comment comes in.
Sure.
And it's really not the case. But that's the way it gets interpreted or translated, and it can be really harmful. What we try to help people understand. So for the last 25 years, ever since that sort of epiphany for me about families in addiction, I have really changed the focus of my career to now work with families predominantly, and not individual care or delivery of care for clients struggling with addiction. I still do some of that.
Yeah. And real quick, during this family work that you're doing, are you also working with the suffering addict or just the family component while the addict's in treatment?
No, actually, one of my colleagues who's on that book, Jack Maroney, and I developed a program, an inpatient 30-day rehab up in northern Massachusetts. And once that was up and running, I started to go into developing a family program for that program. And so for, I don't know, 7 years or so, we worked with families whose loved ones were in our treatment facility, and we would work with them. We developed a family weekend to bring them on campus. We would educate them. We would bring the families together with their loved one who was in treatment for addiction and really try to help them to sort of demystify some of this, try to understand it a little better, and give them some skills or some tools that they could use to try to help support the loved one who was struggling with addiction. Because if you don't know how to do it or you don't know what to do, oftentimes you can do things that really aren't helpful. We know blaming people, shaming people, those things really, they are not effective. What we know, and I learned this from a therapist long ago, probably one of the smartest guys I've ever met. I was developing this program with my partner, Jack, and this therapist said to me, that stuff is all wonderful, Jimmy, but you know what people respond to when they're sick and when they're hurting is love, compassion, and understanding. And so those treatment programs are great, but if you don't have love, compassion, and understanding, you're missing the ball. That's what people respond to, regardless of what the illness is. And I've held that ever since. That's really been sort of a guiding light for me in the work I do, is no matter what the situation is, no matter what the problems are or who the person is, try to treat them, with some love, compassion, understanding, and dignity and respect. That's what people respond to.
Doctor, hang on just for a second. We're going to give a shout out to the CCSAD sponsors for this virtual thing. So stand by just really quick. Hey, folks, this CCSAD conference going virtual this year, now that we're dealing with COVID, C4 has done an amazing job to get this entire conference going online. And the people behind the scenes, Jesse, Katie, Dee, John, everybody over there at C4, making sure that we can still reach out, stay connected, and share the information that we are all discovering, the tactics that we're using, the tools that we're using, and being part of this as Beyond Risk and Back, being able to interview these speakers. Obviously, I love this. I love being able to do this. And we need to be able to give a shout out to corporations, to people who have stepped up and put some money into the hands and the pockets of C4 for the CCSAD Virtual 2020 Conference. And I want to talk about the silver sponsors right now. Alina Lodge, Gosnold, Heal Behavioral Health, Origins Behavioral Health, Recovery Centers of America, Southworth Associates, the District Recovery Community, and Timberline Knowles. You guys, you silver sponsors, thank you so much for stepping in, showing up, giving time, giving money to CCSAD, to C4 events to make sure that we can keep doing these programs. And for those of you who are listening, for those of you who are over here listening to these podcasts and checking out this information, thank you so much for being a part of CCSAD's Virtual 2020 Conference. All right, let's get back to our guest now.
Yeah.
Doc, thank you so much.
Before you go any further, it's a funny story, but when I started in this business, Aaron, 1985, I used to go to the CC, the conference down the Cape.
Yeah, sure.
And I used to think, God, I'd love to present here someday. And so fast forward the tape, and I've been going there for a long, long time. It's a great conference, and I'm just really thrilled to be a part of it. You're right. They do some really cool stuff.
I'll say last year was my first year there. They put me in the fishbowl. I had my whole podcast studio set up. I'm meeting an incredible people, listening to people like you talk, getting you guys on the air again to talk directly to the families who are going through this, because here as experts, we close ourselves in these hotels and we talk to each other and we get to know each other. We get to like each other and trust each other. And then there's these families who need to know what we know. And on that note, doctor, with the book, with all these years in practice, I am really curious, what is effective? You talk, blame and shame, that doesn't work. It's not effective. What is effective? What are, in all these years of work in authoring this book and being with families on a consistent basis, what works when you're sitting with a family and they've got one person who mental health or addiction has just spun the entire family, the entire extended family out? And right, everybody's suffering from addiction, not just this one person. Everybody's got the disease. Everybody's dealing with borderline personality disorder, not just, poor cousin Sarah or Uncle Bill. what works when you get the family together? What's your go-to top 5, 10, 3, 1? What works?
Well, I think first of all, where I go is where they are. And if they're in a lot of pain, or if they're angry, or if they're hurt, then I go there and validate that and give them a forum to vent some of that stuff, because you can't really get anywhere while that stuff is seething. So if you purge some of that, give them an opportunity to talk about how angry they are, how hurt they are, how scared they are. That kind of sets the stage or starts. And from there, for me, I have a full-time tenured faculty position at a college. I teach this stuff. That's what I do, is I try to educate them. About addiction and why they're seeing some of the things that they're seeing, and to really drive home the fact that your loved one, believe it or not, does not want to be doing this. Your loved one does not want to be doing the things you see them doing. It's not that they're having a picnic or a wonderful time. They're struggling, they're scared, they don't know what to do, and they can't stop. And that is really scary. And so I try to educate people to help them to see, not just some of the science that underlies addiction, but some of the behavioral stuff too, to try to let them work through and realize that, yeah, this person is doing things I know they don't want to be doing, to hurt themselves, to hurt me, to hurt their family. That's not what it's about. But when you don't understand addiction, those are the things that you grope for. Did they get in with the wrong crowd? Are they doing this to hurt me? Is it because they're angry at me, because I screwed up as a parent? Is it this? Is it that? And it's a sickness. And when you understand it, those things, not that they're not important, Aaron, because I know you know that they are, and I know your audience knows they are, but those are not primary. Those are secondary, tertiary, and they do influence and they play a part in this puzzle. However, once somebody has an addiction and the brain has been hijacked, and the neurocircuitry changes, and addiction is now driving the bus, all those things really don't matter a whole lot. All that matters is this person is under someone else's control, and they can't stop. And it's making them do things that in their right mind they would never do, to themselves, to people they love and care about. It just doesn't happen that way. And so trying to educate people as to what is really going on starts to open their eyes. And I can see it when we do these family workshops. You can see them, the ones that come in with the hardest sort of exterior, saying this is all crap and don't give me this disease stuff. And if they didn't want to be like this, they'd stop it, and By the time they're done, we have our medical director do a morning 2.5-hour really dynamic presentation. I watch the audience while that's happening, and they start to do this. They start to look like, well, maybe this is a disease. Maybe they can't stop. Maybe that's why they're acting so crazy. Or maybe that's why they're doing the things that they're doing. And once they start to kind of understand it a little, that's when you can really work with them. As long as they think it's a choice, or it's, you're doing it because you like this lifestyle, or you're doing it because you're having fun, they miss it. So we start there.
It's amazing, because even the kids that I work with, the children, 12 to 17 years old, they're like, at no time did I say, when I grow up, I want to be a cutter, addicted to video games 18 hours a day, promiscuous. Like, no, none of them have that. And that guilt and shame locks them in. Let's talk about this capability versus willingness, right? Because a lot of the anger we have about capability, when we think it's willingness, when we're like, oh, they could just stop, they could just do this, and then we realize that right now their brain isn't capable of that. In the interim between willingness and capability, when we're dealing with family, another reason why I think families want to avoid family recovery is because at some point the E word, enabling, codependency, the C word is going to come up, which I don't like either of them. However, they're going to come up. In your experience, who enables more, moms or dads?
Oh, I don't know if I could answer that one with any real authority, because I don't know. I think traditionally moms are maybe a little closer to, the day-to-day, and dads oftentimes are out of the picture, or, working but that's not a fair statement, because I think emotionally or psychologically, everybody bears the brunt of it.
Yeah.
And so everybody, this thing affects everybody. When we say addiction is a family illness, well, that's not trite. That's not something we
No,
thought sounded
definitely
good on a
not.
bumper sticker. It's because it is, and everybody plays a part while this thing is developing and sort of getting traction. And then once things implode, and we're hopefully now on a treatment or a recovery trajectory, everybody plays a part. And
Yeah, doctor, all cards on the table. That's my trap question. And what's amazing is that at these conferences, I am meeting, because like I said, we're all going to these events and talking with each other because we are up on the latest. And this enabling thing, this codependent thing is dying a slow death in the world of recovery. And that's more guilt and shame. And I love your answer because you're like, no, it's not a fair question. Everybody plays a part. The enabling can look like the father avoiding coming home and spends all day at work, and the mom buying the kids heroin and making him fish sticks so that at least he doesn't die on the street. Like, it's not codependency. It's not enabling. You're doing everything that you can think of to keep your kid alive. So I love your answer that we all play a part and we're all suffering the experience.
Yeah. Well, I think the enabling thing immediately by default goes to blame.
Yeah.
So I'm responsible, or I'm at fault. I'm not doing something right. I'm doing something to add to the problem. And it's just not fair.
Right.
This is a sickness that affects everybody, and we don't need to alienate people, or we don't need to push people further away. We need to try, I know addiction is a sickness of disconnection and severing ties and pushing people out of your life. Recovery is about sort of reconnecting and bringing people into under the tent to help. And so for me, anything that pushes people away, like enabling or terms like that, I'm not a fan of. I understand it, but I'm not a fan of it.
Yeah. When you're working with families, moving on from that, when you're working at families, with families that have just been put through the ringer, this child, whether they're young or old, has stolen from them. There's been violence at home. They've created so much chaos and devastation of the heart, let alone the pocketbook. You've put this kid into treatment 3 times. I got a question, 2 questions for you. Number 1 is about the cut bait. At when would you advise a family to just cut bait on the kid and say, sink or swim, it's on them? And then number 2, the question, with that same setup, how do you instill hope in a family that has just, every time they get a breath or the light peeks through the clouds, man, it's dashed right against the rocks yet again? How do you tell them, hey, it's time to cut bait? And how do you give them hope?
Yeah, well, I think I appreciate that, and I'm not sure if you're throwing another trap question. But
I'm not on this one because
I'm going to lead in with my chin.
Good, go for it.
Because I think the cut bait question is relevant. I think it's important, and I don't think I'm smart enough to know the answer to that. But what I tell people is, again, this sickness is about isolation, disconnection, and pushing people away. And if the behavior gets you to a point where you disconnect, then that loved one of yours, that may be the last person that they have any sort of anchoring to. And so I'm not saying you lay down and let them wipe their feet on you. What I'm saying is there are ways to say, I love you. I'm going to stay connected to you. I hate this stuff that's going on, but I'm not going to give up because I think you're worth it. Again, I'm not going to give you my purse or my checkbook. We're going to have some parameters or some boundaries here, but I'm not just going to say, see you later, I'm done with you, call me if you ever get sober, because that person may not get sober. That may be the last time they talk to that individual. Yeah. So I'm very leery on telling people, throw them out, cut them off, all of those things. I don't do that. What I say is there negotiation room? Can you tell them, I love you, I'll be here, I'll take you to treatment anytime you want. I won't give you money, I won't let you live at my house, I won't, do all of these things that I maybe have been doing, but I still love you and I'm here to help you. I'm not jumping in the quicksand with you, but I'm extending the bamboo pole. I'm right here on solid ground. When you want to grab it, and I hope you will, I'm here and I need you to know that. And if you don't grab it and you end up going under, I can't jump in there because something's happening to my screen.
That's all right.
I can't jump in there with you because then we all go down, but I'm here. And so I'm really leery about, divorce them, throw them out, cut them off,
Yeah,
all of
yeah.
those things for that reason.
Beautiful,
The
beautiful,
second
beautiful.
question, the second question again was what?
Hope. Yeah, this family's been
Oh,
through the
okay.
ringer, opioids, meth, marijuana. They're stealing.
Yeah.
It's the
Yeah.
lying, the drinking, the
Yeah.
cheating. How do you look at
Yeah.
them and say they're going to get better?
Well, I don't say they're going to get better. I say they can. Take a look at this. I did all those things. I lived all those things. There is hope that people can change. It's not easy. It takes work. It takes a lot of support. It takes a lot of, rolling up your sleeves and getting in the muck. As someone with this sickness and as someone on the periphery or somebody there to support and help, because there is muck. Addiction is messy. However, people do get better. I am not alone. I, try to get them to go to a Learn to Cope meeting or go to a place where there are other families that are there sharing their, similar to what they do at AA or NA, their experience, strength, and hope. That we too were in that place, that hopeless, horrible place. But things change. I just did, actually, this conference, I did a workshop with a woman named Maureen Cavanaugh, who wrote a book called If You Love Me, about her daughter's addiction and what she went through.
I have interviewed Maureen. What an amazing woman.
Yeah. And so Maureen's daughter, Katie, just celebrated 3 years sober.
Holy mackerel.
So
that's
there's
phenomenal.
the hope, Aaron, that people do. Sad to say, not everybody will, but people do.
Yeah.
And if I can get you to buy into that, then that's another step closer, to sort of working with me or working with the treatment center or whomever, therapist, counselor, to really help do some work to help this individual who's struggling or this family that's struggling to move forward. And I know it can be done. If I didn't believe in this stuff, believe me, I'd go do something else. But I believe in this with my heart and soul. Number one, from my own experience and what I've seen, I have seen the miracle time after time.
Yeah.
And I would venture to say you probably have too.
I have.
It happens, and people do get better and change their lives.
Doc, how are families going to get in touch with you when I have parents who are listening to this and are just like, I need to get in touch with this doctor?
Yeah. The easiest way is I just partnered up with, again, my colleague Jack Maroney and some others to open a treatment facility. It's a day treatment program called Ave Recovery. We've got a website, www.lakeaverecovery.com. We're in the process of developing some work, a family component in that program, similar to what I did up at Spring Hill, which was the 30-day rehab, because we know if you just treat the individual and ignore the family and where that person may be going back to, or at least those relationships, then for me, I think you're missing the boat. I don't think it's good care. I think you need to at least try to include the family, educate the family, support the family, because they can be the greatest source of support for an individual who's struggling with addiction. And so, for me, it's that they just go together and have, ever since I, again, changed my sort of focus about 25 years ago. Now, if the family isn't involved, that for me, it's really hard to just treat the individual.
Right.
So I do a lot of work, a lot of education around working with families, and that's probably what I do most in the process of developing that at Ave Recovery.
And what about someone contacting you directly? You got an email? You got a phone number?
Yeah, number is 508-361-4258. Email is jimdirida@gmail.com. I'm happy to respond and answer any questions, or the book is on Amazon.com. It's called The East Side of Addiction. There's a shameless plug for it right there.
Fantastic plug.
Ironically, that book, through somebody we know locally, got translated into Albanian because there's a woman who worked at the library here in Worcester. We did a presentation in the library for all of their staff. And she said, we have such a huge problem in my country of Albania. Would you be interested in doing something? And so she and a colleague translated the book into Albanian.
Oh, fantastic. Of all the languages.
Over there. Yeah, and here's the ace kicker. They invited Jack and I to come over for a week and work with them in all of their coalitions and their government and their treatment providers to help them to understand what we do here to treat addiction and what our experience has been. So last year we spent a week over there. It was interesting.
That's perfect. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. James DiRida, DIREDA. It's J DiRida at lakeaverecovery.com. And please go to his website at lakeaverecovery.com and the East Side of Addiction. Doc, thanks so much. This was great. I really appreciate your time. And I'd like to do a longer show with you. I'd like to reschedule and have us get a longer show. Yeah, let's do.
Please do. There's lots to talk about, Aaron.
Absolutely. Folks,
and I love it.
Yeah, thank you so much, folks. This is the key. Oh, what he said about, enabling me trying to trap him with the question, and then the cutting bait. His answer was right. You can say, I'm not doing this anymore. It's like I'm not gonna do this, but I'm going to do that. And this is where you start to take your home back, your value back, your child back. And it comes from a really, really potent place of knowing that everything you've done has gotten you to this point. And if you're going to get past this point, you got to do something better. I want to thank CCSAD. I want to thank C4 Events for being a part of the virtual 2020 conference. I want to thank my guest, Dr. James DiRida, author of The East Side of Addiction. And parents, remember, you take care of yourself first, your adult relationship second, and your children third. Because in that way, you're going to do your best work with your children. Thanks to Deepen Productions, who does my music and editing and podcast production. And I will see you next week.
Thank you, Aaron. Okay. Do I need to do anything?
You're